Welcome back to another edition of The Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Really excited about today's guest, Jani Tuomi from imaware. Jani, how are you doing today?
Great. How about you? Thanks for having me.
Good. And did I butcher that last name?
No, you got it.
Okay, excellent. So we've been talking for a while now, and was really excited to get you on here as a guest. For those of you that are not familiar with imaware, they've got a personalized medicine play. It's basically at-home, patient-administered, customized diagnostic tests. And one of the things that I really kind of was drawn to when we were looking at bringing you on the show is there's a gazillion diagnostic tests out there that can give you information. But one of the things that I thought was so unique was, to really allow your tests really allow the patient to detect, analyze, but then also to be able to correct and be able to improve that individual's well-being. And that's the heart of personalized medicine, really, right? Is you want to be able to allow that individual to identify what's going on within themselves, and then also be able to take measures and to improve that situation and measure that. So that was kind of one of the things that I thought was really, really unique about what you guys have going on. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on here. As with every show, what I typically like to do is have you guys just kind of give a brief overview of the company. Maybe, I want to reserve time at the, subsequently to get into real specifics about the product, but maybe give a brief overview of the company. What's the origin story? How did you get in, how did this whole thing kind of come about? I always like to know that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I didn't start out in healthcare. I came from a computer science background and a product manager role that I'd done for almost 20 years. But like many people, my entry into healthcare was because I had a family member get ill, and watching, the kind of the misdiagnosis, and ultimately watching my mom make the diagnosis as an ER nurse. She was, disappointed with the physicians, and ultimately my brother had cancer, and we got in front of it, just in time. And I watched the doctors that then healed him, I called them the sick care doctors, do an amazing job. They ran blood tests twice a day. He had the best of care, and he recovered from it. But the doctors that were supposed to identify that, that there was this cancer inside of him, missed the mark for a year, and sort of, told him he had muscle spasms. So just such a difference between muscle spasms and cancer, right? So that was 2010. My brother recovered, and he's still here, but his life has changed a lot. So it really was Theranos that kind of got me into healthcare when I saw the idea or concept of, hey, a drop of blood that could identify all these diseases. So I followed that company. I was excited for what could have been groundbreaking science. And then, probably like a lot of people, totally thrown off guard when it was all deemed to be a bit of a fraud, or a lot of a fraud now.
Yeah.
But I kept kind of digging into it and wanting to understand what was available. Could, if it wasn't one drop, was it 1, 2, 5, or 10 drops? Could we look at 10 biomarkers instead of 1,000? And ironically, that led me to one of the MD PhDs that had helped debunk Theranos. And he was a clinical biochemist, had discovered the PSA biomarker for men's prostate cancer screening, and was actually working on tests that could identify cancers from just a couple drops of blood. So I had a chance to meet up with that doctor, and just kind of cold messaged, and got into his lab, did a test myself, and saw that from just a couple drops of blood from the finger, I could look at my PSA status. And then he also drew one from my vein, which is the typical gold standard test, and the numbers came out the same. So that was that light bulb moment where I thought, hey, the blood from your finger, just a couple drops, is the same as the blood from your vein, where you need to
Where was he based out
of? Mount Sinai Hospital.
Okay.
And so that was the moment, and I said, hey, you're this world-regarded PhD MD. I'm a product person who loves to build digital. There's got to be something here where we can build something that can help people like my brother identify a condition that they clearly don't want to talk about, and we can do earlier than them getting sick. So that was actually the birth of imaware. I kind of quit my job the next day and went all in.
Did you really?
it was one of those moments. It was just like I had no idea that morning that I was going to go home and say, hey, I'm to my wife that I'm quitting my job, because I just felt like I wanted to do it. It felt like a calling, if there's such a thing. And
wow, you were that compelled. That's such a
it
cool
really
story.
was. Yeah, seeing
Wow.
seeing those numbers from just a couple drops of blood match up to the traditional, vein prick here, and it just felt like it was something I wanted to do. So, that was it. It was late 2017, and the rest is history. So that's been about 5 years, 5.5 years now that I'm aware of the idea, the concept has since been funded, has grown. We've evolved from initially starting off direct to consumer, where we, got a lot of fast feedback from patients who wanted to pay out of pocket. And now
Sure.
we really are focused on B2B and B2B to C, where
Yeah.
we take all of that digital and the kitting and the labs, and we deploy that out to virtual health organizations.
At scale.
Whether it's employers, yeah, exactly. Employer programs or, wellness companies. We've got vitamin companies that are now starting to put their money where their mouth is. Like, our vitamins will improve your health, and here's testing that can show you, that improvement. So it's been an exciting ride for sure.
So when you went to that doctor's lab and did that test, at that point in time, PSA obviously was one of the tests that you could run from a finger prick. How many other biomarkers were there at that point in time, that whether it was that physician or any other physician, how widely spread was the biomarker via finger prick at that point?
In 2017, not so much. A little later in 2018, you started to see some other companies come out with technologies that were similar and starting to look at food sensitivities and other things. But oftentimes the science wasn't quite there, the data wasn't good enough. So that was actually when we did start, I'm aware, having this, PhD, it was very important that we did everything as good as, traditional gold standard testing. So it was actually,
Sure.
it was in our pitch deck, like, we are not Theranos because we do all these things. And we actually became the first at-home testing company to submit for peer review, to showcase data, methods, and know-how. Like, we wanted to make sure that if we're going to do this, and we're going to take these biomarkers and bring them into small volume, that we could actually replicate, within a very high degree of certainty, the accuracy and precision of a traditional test.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
So it's interesting because, in startups, I always think you got to be good, but you also it really helps to have good timing. Sounds like your timing was like really good, because jumping in 2017 and then things kind of starting to develop from a biomarker perspective, probably caught some tailwinds there that were, it's always beneficial to be able to jump into a market that's evolving around you versus, having to constantly face headwinds, so to speak.
Well, I'll add to the fact that nobody saw COVID coming, but that really did open up the at-home testing market.
Sure.
Especially when those Abbott tests became to market, and they were very reliable compared to some of the other rapid antigen tests that weren't that reliable. I credit Abbott to making the home testing market much more viable, and billions of tests have now been run at home. And it's really opened up the consumer's mindset to things like, okay, well, if I could test for COVID from home, why can't I test for my A1C from home and or my standard lipid panel or my annual wellness check, right? Some of these, kind of more routine tests. And so, yeah, I wish we could have seen that one coming, but that has really opened up the market for at-home testing.
Yeah. So let's get into the product. How are you guys approaching, at-home diagnostic testing differently than the other companies, the other players that are out there in the space?
Yeah, it certainly is a bit of a mouthful answer, but I'll try to summarize. One of the things that I think is really important is, first off, the data's got to be there. So we really make sure that if you're going to run a test for any given condition, that we can compare it back to its gold standard test. When we're asking somebody to trust our brand, we need to make sure that the data they take to their physician or action on is something they can trust. So we do a lot of data and generate a lot of data around stability and transport, and making sure that sample is just as viable as another sample coming from a lab or a doctor's office. So lots of focus on data. But I think the point that you made earlier when you introduced me was, a lot of companies will just give you a test and kind of leave you with it, right? So what happens next? And giving you guidance and actioning that. Even some of the ways in which we're bringing our new STI test to market is to bring it, full circle back to helping that person actually treat, improve, and educate on not getting that condition again, right? So
right.
It's really important for us to kind of take the clinical advisory team that we have and almost like download their brains into our platform digitally. So whether you're in a small town up north, like where I grew up, or, in Miami, or, kind of anywhere, you have this advisor who's regarded in the nation as one of the best doctors in that space. And their bedside manner, their interpretations, their language is actually on our reports. So when you open up this report, it speaks to you like, this expert physician would. And I think that really helps patients just understand what they're looking at, understand what these results are relative to where they should be, what they could be improving, and then help map out a plan alongside either virtual care, that we can provide through telemedicine, or back to their doctor, and actually help them take action on it. And we've had a lot of physicians who've had patients take imaware reports in and say, yeah, I can trust this because I see you have this science, this clinical, this expert, and I'm going to run with that. And what we've seen compared to a lot of other competitors out there, their tests just get kind of thrown away and that patient has to rerun that test again. So we've worked really hard to get, that clinical adoption. That's really important for us. So the way we do that digitally and through our advisory team and the way we roll it out is something I think has really been our focus and our biggest differentiator in the market. And then digital just lets that scale out to 50 states, to the smallest town anywhere in the corner of the map.
Yeah.
And that's important for me because that's how I grew up, and that's why, my brother didn't really get the diagnosis because he was in a small town, and how could that doctor there know everything about every possible condition, right?
Yeah, that's the democratization of healthcare that everybody keeps talking about. And how can somebody I grew up in Bakersfield, a smaller town in Central California, how can somebody there receive the same care that somebody's getting at Cedars-Sinai or Mount Sinai or MD Anderson or whatever. So for those that are listening, and let me have you just explain a little bit further in detail, because when we talked about it before, it really struck me. So when somebody takes an at-home test, they get their report back. So you guys have gone, let's say if it's a fertility test that you've run, you guys have gone out, you guys have hired world thought leaders in fertility that have built these interpretations, for lack of a better term, of the results that the patient will then get. So it's basically the patient's going to get back an interpretation of their results, and it's going to be from a world thought leader, that is an expert in this specific space. Can you talk to kind of, how exactly that what that looks like when the patient gets it, what they can do with that, and then maybe a little bit more about the data side of it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's
the digital component of it, because as to me, that's the piece that when we talked originally, that's the piece that I think is one of them really caught my attention. Is this is special because you're getting, not only are you just getting a number back, but you're getting an interpretation. You're getting an interpretation from a world thought leader, and maybe here's some things that we recommend that you do to moving forward.
Yeah, well, exactly. So fertility is a perfect example, but this can apply to almost any other condition, whether it's, celiac
cardiology,
disease or anywhere else. So, the labs that most people run, they spit back a number, and that number is a global number. It just means, this is where you are, and it doesn't really have any relativity to anything. So when you do a fertility test and you look at your AMH marker, for example, the lab will say, you're good if you're over 1.0. But most, fertility experts who are wanting to support the person who's starting their family actually suggest a number greater than 1.8 to 2.2, because that improves the odds of, being able to create a family, to potentially reduce risk in miscarriage. And so there's the difference between what we call good science and good clinical. The lab director says, hey, this person's positive because they're greater than 1. Bingo, done. That's it. The assay did its job. But if we just handed that to a patient and said, great, you're fine, you're over one, that doesn't mean they're optimized, right? So I think the difference is lab cutoffs are typically binary. They're just like yes, no answers.
Yes.
But you need more detail, right? So we kind of carved the yes, no into green, yellow, orange, red. And
love that.
It's surprising when you take that and then take the bedside manner of this expert physician to say, all right, if you're over 2.0 in this, you are actually optimized. You know, your fertility hormones look excellent. That's a better answer than you're above baseline, right? And so just things like that. And so being able to build that in algorithmically into the platform to augment that digital answer from the lab with that digital answer from the clinician and match the two together, that's what makes it powerful. And then, you know, again, anyone running this test in anywhere of the 50 states, if they only had a primary care, you know, doctor in their city or hospital or wherever, the physician would say, okay, I got the lab report, you're over one, you're good to go. But that's not true, because if they went to a fertility expert, that person would say, well, actually, can you do ABC to improve it? Let's test you again in 3 months. And, you know, that patient might have lost 3, 6, 9 months trying to start a family. So getting that specialty advice right up front, you know, is powerful. It helps, you know, people not have to go through some of the slowness of what it originally takes to get going and improving their health, and they get that great answer with insights right off the bat. So that's why we think it's important to scale this message of specialty doctors in some of these conditions like cardiology, fertility, and GI.
Right. So you in essence allow these people to receive the care of a world thought leader without having to go to that physician's office and have them run the labs in office or whatever. You're getting that caliber of opinion, I guess, is ultimately what it is. And you guys have gone out in, whether it's urology, fertility, you guys have sought out the thought leaders in all of these different specialties, so that regardless of what panel you're having run, you're going to get a thought leader's opinion on that specific from that specific specialty.
Yeah, and it all started with our celiac panel. We got, you know, the doctor who's deemed the godfather of celiac disease, Dr. Guandolini, came over from Italy and trained a lot of the celiac experts now who are across the nation. He was at UChicago. And, you know, he really just did a lot to build awareness amongst physicians around what is this gut thing that's causing people to gain weight and lose weight at the same time, right? Some people are going this way and some people are going that way. So it really confused doctors. And, you know, he really built a protocol around celiac disease. And so when I approached him and said, hey, do you want to be the brains behind our celiac disease at-home test? He's like, I'm all in, because I want a great scientific product that I can help take my knowledge and spread to thousands of people. And
at
to
scale.
this day, and that's celiac disease is probably one of our better selling tests, simply because most doctors don't even know what those symptoms are, or they're confusing, right? It's like, hey, I saw a patient who had celiac and they gained weight, and now you're telling me you're losing weight? Well, that can't be celiac. But it actually can be, right? So this is where, again, just giving the patient a little more education and information, they can go have a great conversation with their doctor. And now the doctor has, you know, shortcut the path from, well, let's explore if it's IBS, or let me give you Tums and call me back in 90 days and see if you feel better, right? Like, we're accelerating the path to actually getting an improved health outcome.
And what's can you talk a little bit about what the digital component, the digital implications of these tests are?
So, great question. I mean, obviously, you kind of want to take the knowledge of this expert and build it into an algorithm in the system. And funny enough, like the doctors, when they're looking at labs, it's not like there's an infinite number of possibilities. Yeah, I don't want to oversell what we've built, right? It's not like it's this chat GPT machine learning, you know, it is looking at a finite number of scenarios, but more importantly, it's what do you do with that number, right? And so getting the expert and just building this knowledge database and really just the most basic of AIs, if you think about it, that can just help replicate that against this individual patient's scenario. Building that in digital is actually relatively easy once you have that expert and we've surveyed and interviewed them and really spent the time to get to know them and build the clinical protocols with them. So we actually do a lot of that upfront heavy lifting and document and create all this, and then programming it is actually relatively simple in our system now that we've built it once. All of these conditions, you know, really do behave more like a spectrum, not a yes, no, or an off on switch, right? Like heart disease, it's not like you don't have it, then you have it. You progressively, increase towards having heart disease. Diabetes is pre-diabetes, you keep increasing and then you have it. So most of these conditions you can identify months in advance of having that known symptom or that cutoff at the lab that says, yes, you got this thing, right? Mm-hmm. And like A1C, for example, lots of times people just be like, oh, you're fine. And then the next day you go and it ticks over by 0.1.
Ticks over.
Now you need drugs. Wow,
yeah.
That's wild. So, I think that's the point we're trying to make is building that into digital. A platform can easily process that for thousands of patients, right? And it saves the physician time because that way they can focus on those that actually have these high results instead of just like saying, hey, you look fine and see the next patient, right? Like this is not meant to disrupt the doctor. It's just meant to help them triage the right patient at the right time, right?
Yeah. Augment, supplement.
Yeah.
Complement. Yeah. And so, how many tests do you guys offer?
So we've got a menu of about 100 biomarkers, and we've got a lot of clients now who are personalizing right down to the individual patient. So if they screen for 15 markers and they've got, let's just say high inflammation, the next monitoring test would just look at that inflammation marker. So we can drive down costs. So that level of personalization means we're almost at a level of like infinite numbers of tests that these patients can get because it's that personalized now. So we don't just have 18 tests off the shelf and, we sell everybody the same test. It's actually the biomarkers you need given, your family history, the condition and the symptoms you think that you're presenting, and the physician's thoughts on it when ordering. So 100 biomarkers, miniaturized, great data that showcases equivalency to, traditional methods and compatible in that home setting.
In the startup world, it's so difficult to develop and iterate products so quickly. How have you been able to do that with, in such a short period of time to be able to develop all of these different biomarkers? Because each different biomarker has to have you have to develop that spectrum and the algorithm. How have you guys been able to develop and product wise and iterate so rapidly?
Yeah, I think that's the product manager's bane there in terms of trying to get stuff out fast and responsibly, right? So especially in healthcare, you got to do things responsibly and do no harm, so you can't just put out half-baked product. I think the key here is for us that we really do believe in what I'd call product design and creating clickable prototypes, working with our, the partners that we have or even with the patients directly to showcase what it is that we could bring to the table and kind of using what I would deem vaporware in essence, going to talk to your clients and your patients and say, how does this solve your problem? Does this help? Does this way of articulating the result work for you? And you can build those things in hours and days nowadays, right? Not even days, hours. And you can iterate on those really quickly. We've had clients where we make those edits on the call and they're like, chief medical officer is like, that's exactly what we want. Looks like you guys have built it. Let's get going. And so then you take this prototype and you turn to your engineering team and say, all right, this is what we need. Now let's go build it because we've got a client or patient demand for it. There's a contract coming, and we're going to start building this test out and people will buy it. So flipping that narrative a bit around, let's not build things first. Let's actually get validation from your community, your patients, your buyers through prototyping, which you can iterate on really quick, and then build what the end product is that they're going to sign up for. So that's been good for us. And,
that's your product background coming out, right?
A little bit, yeah. Yeah. It's, I used to be an engineer and I hated building things when people were, not clear on what they wanted. They're like, hey, just go code that thing and make sure it does that. And that's horrible for an engineer, right? But if you bring a beautiful, fully baked prototype, it's like, I can build that, right? So
right. And I can build it quickly.
Yeah, exactly, right? So
yeah. No, that's great. And so you guys, you had mentioned originally you were DTC, direct to consumer, and then that's kind of shifted now. Who are you selling to? And what, how is that? You had mentioned it's B2B and then B2B C. Who's ultimately, obviously the the patients, the end user, but who are you guys primarily marketing to at this point?
Yeah, so DTC, for those who haven't yet launched a DTC company, is both the best way to get early feedback and build a brand fast, but also the most expensive way to do it, right?
Right.
You're paying huge acquisition costs. It's unsustainable. If anyone's watching the economics on Uber and others, like they basically they were paying customers to take taxi rides. Like that's pretty wild. And so in our space, the same thing's true. Lots of companies are paying for somebody to take a test. Like that's unsustainable. So the evolution to B2B for us came through COVID, when we had a lot of companies start asking for our COVID tests, because again, we stuck to the science and we wanted to have healthcare professionals support the nasopharyngeal draw versus just being self-collect. Especially in the early days, that just wasn't a viable option. So with B2B now, we work with employer programs. So employers are getting pretty savvy about finding ways to deliver benefits, especially with at-home workforces, so that there can be at-home testing and screening and virtual primary care. That certainly has been a result of COVID and sort of the push for remote work. So employers are a big payer group, and they want to see cost savings and improved adoption. We're seeing digital health companies that are either reversing diabetes or offering, again, consults over video. They need some data in advance of that consult to make a decision, right? You can't change what you don't measure, right? So a lot of these digital health companies themselves actually need at-home testing to deliver at-home care. A couple of years ago, a lot of these companies were like, hey, let's get on a phone or a video, but oh, by the way, please go to your local lab and
run to the lab.
And no one ever did it. So they couldn't deliver their protocols without that data, right? So we're seeing a lot of kind of those two areas. And then lastly, wellness. It's amazing to see companies be like, we've got the best vitamins in the market. We're going to put our money where our mouth is and give you a blood test pre and post. And that kind of
that would move the needle for me if I was considering on buying their product.
Yeah, personalized nutrition is and personalized meals and kind of just food as medicine, as kind of the quote of the industry. Yep. Is coming, and data, backing it with data on you so that you eat and kind of improve the way you think you should with food and diet and lifestyle as a change versus taking a therapy, especially in the preventative space. That's powerful. So brands are starting to differentiate by offering quantitative tests to put their money where their mouth is. So that's where our kind of three areas of growth in the B2B to C areas. And then we get to work with those companies to reach their communities of customers and patients.
And then from there, those patients may go on and order another test. Or you were mentioning you've got a fertility panel, you've got a men's health panel, so that if they go take the celiac test and there's a men's health panel, then it just kind of it balloons from there, I would think. Yeah. What and how is it paid for now, and where do you see the future of this the future of the economics of this market going?
Yeah, so most of this is cash pay or employer pay. So employers are, I think they cover like 50% of working Americans. So they're a big payer themselves. You can think of them as an insurer in a sense. So they're a payer there in some of these protocols, and right up to cash pay. A lot of companies customers are just wanting to pay out of pocket for virtual care because they're either underinsured, uninsured, unemployed, or otherwise, or self-employed, and so they choose to take some of the healthcare costs and matters into their own hands. So we're seeing a lot of that. I think we're going to see the advent of a CPT code, which will allow for home testing to be fully reimbursed. The kitting, the convenience, the shipping, those components today aren't really covered. So that's why I think we see a little bit of a low adoption for home testing. But the moment that I think that changes, especially maybe in the Medicare Advantage programs, I think we're going to see home testing become like the de facto way for hospitals to keep patients at home for conditions like just, hey, regular A1C checking to heart disease to screening and annual checks, right? Let's keep that hospital for the people who are truly sick and really prioritize the doctor's time for those that need it most. So I think you're going to see home testing really make a push and help that happen.
That's huge. Yeah, no, that was one of the things I wrote on LinkedIn this week from one of the takeaways from JPM, the JP Morgan conference, was just, it's clear as day. I mean, it's not even the industry wants to move care from the acute care setting to the home, it has to. It's a capacity issue. There's not enough. 50 years from now, there's not going to be nearly enough doctors. There's not going to be nearly enough hospitals. It's going to have to be. Hospitals will be where surgery happens and where trauma is taken care of, and then everything else is going to happen at home, and we're just going to have to figure out. The system's choking on itself. We're going to have to figure out ways to accommodate for that, and it's going to be technologies like this that are going to facilitate it. I have no doubt about that.
I just wanted to say something there because I think most people don't even understand. They're like, well, how can there be a shortage? I mean, the system just worked right before COVID. Like, what happened, right? I get asked that a lot. Like, what happened, right? And so there's three things happening, right? There's the patients as a percentage of people are getting sicker. It's horrible to say, but we are sicker than we were 3 and 5 and 10 years ago. Yep. There's this I don't know if you saw the chart on LinkedIn, but it blew my mind. I think it was 30 years ago. The majority of people in every state were deemed normal weight or not overweight, the majority. Mm-hmm. And now the majority of people in every state are deemed
obese.
It's actually flipped 100% in 30 years. Like an entire generation has just become sicker. And so the results of that are heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune conditions, and other, things like even just knee replacements and just this, so that the patient themselves need more hospital time. Secondly, you got COVID in there, which is just consuming hospital time. So the hospital didn't grow to support COVID. And lastly, there's just less healthcare professionals, not per capita, but just overall. Like they have left industry. They've been burnt out. They've been, just pushed aside or so we have less people serving more people, and and the hospital hasn't changed or improved enough or caught up to that yet. So it's the last few years that really just pushed it over that tipping point. And that's why it feels like, whoa, this came out of nowhere. How did we not know this? But it's been happening for 30 years, slowly, right?
100%. And everybody's been talking about the aging population, right? I mean, that you throw that on top of it is just, the population's getting older. And so, it's like gas on fire. It's going to make it work. So yeah, no, I absolutely, any technology that's going to facilitate at-home care is going to be front of mind for the consumers in the system. It's just, like I said, it's not even an option. Anything new on the horizon for you guys? What are you guys looking at in terms of new technologies, new developments? Anything exciting coming downstream?
I think the one technology that I'm most excited about, which isn't really a technology, but it's going to make the biggest difference, is that very act of going to your finger and drawing your own blood, and or collecting your own saliva or going into your nose. Like everyone knows that's generally not that amazing. Even if you do those COVID tests, like you got to do this, you got to take a bunch of buffer and you got to mix it around and squeeze it. Like it's pretty hard, right? And if you just ask an average person to do that, it's not intuitive. And so, for this coming year, I think the part I'm most excited about is our ability to take that user experience thought on the digital side and actually build something that's just like, I hate to say the word, but just stupid proof. Like make it like a toaster, right? Like just pop it on your finger like a thumb, whatever it is that you use for sewing, and it just goes on, comes off, and it's got the collection. Like just something like that. Or you put like a piece of chewing gum in your mouth, you chew it for a few minutes, you take that out and you put it in a baggie because it's got the sample it needs. Like, picture 23andMe where you're just like spitting 40 times into a vial, you go dry. Like the industry collection experience is pretty horrible. And so I think as outsiders, I think we have an opportunity to really make that awesome and make it something where
it like Apple.
That's you stole that one classic line, right? But if Apple was doing this, how would they do that, right? And they wouldn't want you doing all this crazy stuff. It'd be like trying to make toast in a toaster and you're building the toaster every time, right? So I think that's not per se exciting technology, but I think that's where you're going to see, if we can make it really easy, it just compels people to want to do it even more and more, right? If it's like, I actually imagine that you could enjoy the experience of actually taking your own sample. I mean, that might be a stretch, but that's where we're heading towards. So I think that's definitely an area of focus for us through some of the partnerships we've established. And then we have great lab partners who are pushing the needle on how much can you analyze per drop of blood. And, so that dream of Theranos might be alive in 5 to 10 years where you can look at 1,000 biomarkers from a couple drops of blood. Like The precision of the machinery is getting better and better. Throughputs are improving, and we're going to get to a day where just, you don't run a screening test for celiac, you run a screening test for every condition in your body. So
Sure.
I can't wait for that, but some of that's going to take some time.
Yeah, it's like a whole body scan, right? Remember when that came out and everybody was like, wait, you can scan the whole body from one test, one imaging test. That's the goal. If you have to draw blood, right? You want to draw 3-4 drops of blood. I don't want to just know if I've, what my HDL is. I want to know, am I at risk for any cancers? And if you can get there, then I think that now that's what compels people to do this on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
If I can give you 4 drops of blood on January 1 every year, and you can tell me how I've changed from last year and what's coming downstream for me, you've got customers for life.
Yeah. That's definitely the goal, because it's amazing how many people are, that I've talked to are like, I ran my annual wellness check 5 years ago. I'm like, do you know how much can change in 5 years? And it's lots of these things are silent killers. I hate to say that, right? And I'm not trying to make people afraid, but it's like your heart doesn't tell you it's going to have a heart attack till it does, right? Or, just like my brother, probably didn't know he had cancer until literally he had it. And so a lot of these conditions, if you can catch them, and you can do it fast, easy, and affordable, you start to move to annual testing. And then, some of these you could even do twice a year. And you're just getting that check mark, that green check mark, saying you're good. You just move on to your life. You're done in 5 minutes and you keep going. I mean, we know that.
And if you can give me all that information and you can make the collection easy, to your point, maybe it's not enjoyable, but it's easy and it's paid for, there's no that's a triple threat.
Yeah,
there's no reason why somebody wouldn't do that. That's the I got to think the panacea for you guys, right? That's 100%. Where you want to end up.
The dream, the hope, the vision. Yeah, that's, if that happens and we're part of that, and I get to personally be part of that journey to help bring that and and help people get in front of disease. I mean, that's the dream. So.
Yeah, you had mentioned that I want to be respectful of your time, but I before we wrap up, you had mentioned you always like to give something back to the audience for listening, and one of the questions I had for you that I thought would be kind of an interesting one is just you guys you've continued to innovate and whatnot. How do you balance that with growth? Peter Thiel talks about how when companies reach 150 people, it becomes really difficult to be hyper-focused on growth and innovate at the same time. How have you guys been able to continue to innovate while focusing on growing the core business?
Yeah, I was going to make a bad joke, which is don't hire that 150th employee, because now you fall off the cliff, right? But
to talk to you about your point earlier of ticking over that one marker, right?
Yeah, exactly. One of the things I learned way back before I even got into imaware was just the power of almost pods and the thinking of like groups of people from diverse backgrounds focused on kind of one thing can do a lot, especially if they're supported with outside vendors or consultants or contractors. So I used to structure big teams into smaller pods. And so that idea is true, in essence, that imaware. We grew at one point during COVID, and we got pretty big, and you could see that all of a sudden there were cracks in things like culture. All of a sudden, we had to deal with. We had people working in different states, and we had all these different HR requirements. And you could start to see the cracks forming at even 49, 50 people, right? Like that, wow, if we keep growing like this, things are going to happen. But we exited the COVID business and kind of right-sized the business accordingly. But what I really think is the best thing is to keep your teams tight and small and focused. And if there's something new that doesn't feel like that's their vision or mission, maybe just create a new company or create a new team out of it. And I like to give Google credit for this, right? Google's a collection of hundreds of companies within a big company. And they have really good mandates, right? Like this team's mission is to do this, and that's it. And if there's another kind of thing that looks like a shiny object, think about it as being a different company entirely or an entirely different department, but don't just like add a manager under a director to create a VP title and all this overhead. You're going to really stifle everything. So just smaller pods of people with a direct, clear focus and action has been sort of the ability, for us to stay focused and innovate. And then if they do start growing, bring in growth experts, whether it's a consultant or an organization that can come in that's best of breed. That company that's supporting that pod, can bring 20 more people who are energized and can go and work there. And if all they need is 6 months of support, great. You can tell that contractor or that vendor that, hey, you guys will be wrapped up in 6 months. It's a little harder to fire people after 6 months, right? Because you might evolve and grow and your needs will change. So I kind of try not to hire people as my first course of action. It's, let's see what we can do with our team. What support do they need? And let's see if this is something we really need for a long run, and or is it something that's just short term right now that we need a little bit of support on, and go from there. So I always think of people who are working with me as there for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And lifetimes are the ones the employees really want to invest in and build that core team around. Everyone else could be a vendor or a contractor or a consultant who's best of breed in that space. So it gives you flexibility, you get to grow, and you still keep innovating is what's worked for me in the past. So
no, it's sage advice for sure. Really excited for you. I believe this, especially with everything that we're seeing from a preventative and lowering readmissions or early diagnosis. These types of technologies are going to be the future of medicine. So I think you guys are in a really neat space, but I love the attention that you're taking to the details and really taking it just beyond a test, but giving it meaningful advice to the individuals that are taking the test. In fact, I was looking on your website last night. I'm gonna subscribe for the men's health test. I want to see, exactly what it is you guys have coming down the pipe. So I'll be able to give you some customer feedback soon. Well, listen, I want to get you out of here, but again, Jani, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. I know this is going to be a popular episode, and definitely would love to have you back at some point in the future and get caught back up and get an update on what's new with imaware and go from there. But thank you again for joining the show.
No, thanks for having me. My pleasure. And
all right.
Take care.
All right, folks, that's it for today. We'll catch you on the next episode and appreciate you tuning in.